They think if you are supporting election integrity, question what happened in 2020, and object to the government propaganda and government strictures on COVID-19, you're considered a threat, a terrorist threat. First up is the rising tyranny here at home and then abroad in Canada with the trucker protests. You've been following the news, I'm sure, about the protests in Canada by Canadians fed up with the tyranny in Canada related to COVID lockdowns and mandates. And you've had this organic trucker movement of truckers and their families and their supporters who are advocating for freedom and liberty in the face of mandates that are constraining their ability to earn a living and put food on their table. So what has been the response of the government in Canada? Well, first it was quiet, but they've been increasingly ratcheting up the effort to tamp down this civic protest. And it involves sometimes civil disobedience, which the left has told us is the highest form of protest. When you engage in civil disobedience to protect your civil liberties in the face of government tyranny. Well, that's only if you're on one side of the philosophical divide. If you're on the wrong side of the philosophical divide, you're terrorists and insurrectionists, which is what they're calling these truckers. I'm not aware of any major, they're other than the civil disobedience and blocking roadways, which understandably is disruptive and concerning to authorities there. But they're not engaged in violence. They're not engaged in the massive rioting and looting and burning of buildings that you saw during the the summer of 2020 and beyond with the violent left here in the United States. You have the Biden administration encouraging, practically speaking, the Canadian government to use force to crack down on these protesters seeking to vindicate their civil liberties. You have the Canadian government both at the federal and provincial level, suggesting that people will lose their livelihoods and be punished in ways that, you would have to be in China to face similar types of punishment for protesting in a political context like what is going on now. You have the governor of Michigan, the Democrat governor of Michigan, offering to send state resources to a foreign country to help suppress demonstrations there. And with the justification being there's a bridge, a significant thoroughfare between Canada and the United States as it goes into Michigan, that as the traffic had been disrupted there for a time. So the transnational progressives hate anyone who opposes them. And they use the powers of government improperly to try to target any opposition. And in the case of Canada, they're changing the laws on the go, it seems like, declaring, for instance, a state of an emergency in Ottawa. So something that had been lawful all of a sudden becomes unlawful. And they're threatening to put people in jail for up to a year for not only impeding traffic, but impeding a sidewalk. So that's the state of play in Canada. But it's not just in Canada do we have to worry about the government seeing its people as the enemy. It's happening here in the United States with the Biden administration. Ever since January 6th, the left that controls the Biden administration has seen the January 6th events as an excuse and pretext to target anyone who opposes Biden's agenda, or the agenda generally of, as I say, the transnational left, the extremist left. And they've suggested, more or less, that if you want election security and had concerns about what happened in the elections, you're a criminal. If you object to COVID shutdowns and lockdowns and abuses and mandates, you're a criminal. And it's no exaggeration to say they now think that you're a terrorist potentially if you object to these types of problems, elections, the attack on election security and the attack on our liberties as a result of these senseless COVID lockdowns. The DHS has been issuing these threats to the homeland bulletins, National Terrorism Advisory System Bulletin. And this is what this bulletin says. While the conditions underlying the heightened threat landscape, they're talking about terrorism here, have not significantly changed over the last year, And by the last year, they mean January 6th. The convergence of the following factors has increased the volatility, unpredictability, and complexity of the threat environment. Number one, the proliferation of false or misleading narratives which sow discord or undermine public trust in U.S. government institutions. So the Biden administration has officially said that if you, quote, issue misleading narratives which undermine public trust in U.S. government institutions, like, according to the left, that's what Judicial Watch does 24/7. That's what big tech uses as an excuse to censor tens of millions of Americans, including yours truly. You're a terrorist. Key factors contributing to the current heightened threat environment include the proliferation of false or misleading narratives which sow discord or undermine public trust in U.S. government institutions. For example, there is widespread online proliferation of false or misleading narratives regarding unsubstantiated, widespread election fraud and COVID-19. Grievances associated with these themes inspired violent extremist attacks during 2021. Now, I'm not quite sure what extremist attacks they're talking about. They're probably thinking about January 6th. That was a riot, wasn't an extremist attack. I don't know if there were one-off violent activities that took place since then. But how do you read that or hear that and not conclude they think if you are supporting election integrity, question what happened in 2020, and object to the government propaganda and government strictures on COVID-19, you're considered a threat, a terrorist threat? False or misleading. By whose standard is this false or misleading? The left-wing fact checkers? Lying Anthony Fauci? Lying Joe Biden? Lying Mayorkas, who heads DHS, who is completely capitulated to the extremist left. You want to talk about extremism? It's the extremists in control of our government that's undermining the rule of law and contributing to the distrust of government institutions. That's the extremism we need to worry about. So you may be aghast at what's happening in Canada, but here you have an official government document out of the Biden administration that essentially is threatening half of the American people with being treated like terrorists for objecting to mask mandates and raising questions about the origin of COVID. These are dangerous times. As I keep on saying, our republic is under attack. In fact, that's the title of my latest book. For Judicial Watch, a republic under attack. As we talked about recently, last week, the Biden administration is assaulting the First Amendment, encouraging corporations to censor Americans like Joe Rogan, like everyone who opposes their agenda. The veil's been lifted. They don't even believe in these core constitutional civil liberties enshrined in the Constitution, and which be even outside the Constitution are God-given. Our right to speech. And Judicial Watch is not going to be intimidated. We're going to keep on suing. We're going to keep on educating. We're going to keep on litigating. We're going to keep on investigating. Elections, COVID, Biden corruption, attacks on our civil liberties by the Biden administration and other deep state actors, defending the rule of law, defending the United States Constitution. And in the meantime, our political leadership here in Washington, D.C. is completely out to lunch on it. We know where one party stands because their party controls the Congress and the presidency. But where's the leadership of the other party? There are some voices out there that understand the crisis, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and people like that. And of course, they've been excised and banned and censored. Exiled, I should say, not excised. I mean, Mitch McConnell, he doesn't understand any of this. In some ways, he has contempt and shares the concerns that DHS is putting out here. There's this attack on those who disagree with the big government agenda. And it's nothing new. It just gets worse and worse. In 2010, you had the rise of the Tea Party movement. And what was the reaction of the government to it? Suppression through the IRS, the FBI, and other government agencies with the support of Congress. And it helped ensure, in part, Obama's reelection by suppressing the Tea Party using the IRS. 2016 comes along. You had the rise of Trump and that associated movement that offended the establishment. They came up with this smear operation, targeting him and his supporters. 2020. Everyone who has concerns about election integrity is a threat to the public interest, threat to democracy. It keeps on happening. And it always, they for the left, you can't oppose them in good faith. If you oppose them, they think of ways to put you in jail or intimidate you and suppress you improperly. It happens time and time again. And it's happening again. And we're going to call it out. I mean, with Trump, it never stopped. It probably began in 2015, practically speaking. Now this week, there's been this big smear campaign, and let's talk about disinformation about his White House records. The theory is he had White House records that he took with him, presidential records. Illegal, improper. That he would tear up documents while he read them. He'd do this. Oh, Lord, they say, that's a violation of the law. It isn't. And anyone who says they're an expert and says it is, either doesn't know what they're talking about or is being dishonest. Judicial Watch has litigated these issues for 2 decades. We understand how the, quote, Presidential Records Act operates. Heck, we sued the National Archives, which handles presidential records after a president leaves office, because Bill Clinton had dozens of tapes that he had indicating government activity where he was talking to foreign leaders, the sorts of things that were kind of core presidential records potentially. And we sued, and the court looked at our lawsuit, left-wing judge, and said, go pound sand. This is what the judge found. Because I'm reading you this because you're seeing online, or maybe you haven't, maybe you ignore the left, and I hope you do. But they're trying to gin up a prosecution against Trump over these issues. So the theory is that Trump is not allowed to manage his White House records, presidential records, and that's not the law. It doesn't make sense that would be the law because he's the president. He gets to decide which records he wants to keep and which records should be kept keep as personal versus which should be kept for posterity under the Presidential Records Act. He's the decider. It's his records. Under the statutory scheme, this is the judge applying again, Supreme Court and the circuit precedent, DC circuit precedent. Under the statutory scheme established by the Presidential Records Act, the decision to segregate personal materials from presidential records is made by the president during the president's term and in his sole discretion. Since the president is completely entrusted with the management and even the disposal of presidential records during his time in office, it would be difficult for this court to conclude that Congress intended that he would have less authority to do what he pleases with what he considers to be his personal records. The PRA contains no provision obligating or even permitting the archivist to assume control over records that the president categorized and filed separately as personal records. At the conclusion of the president's term, the archivist only assumes responsibility, quote, for the presidential records, meaning the records that the president has designated and didn't take with him. Plaintiff contends that its factual allegations about the nature and substance of the audio tapes clearly establishes them to be presidential records, regardless of how they were treated by President Clinton, the plaintiff being Judicial Watch. The court is not so sure. But even if the court were inclined to agree with the plaintiff's reassessment of President Clinton's decision, it would not alter the conclusion that the injury cannot be redressed. The PRA does not confer any mandatory or even discretionary authority on the archivist to classify records. Under the statute, this responsibility is left solely to the president. Okay, that was the fact check you need to understand the big lie that's being promulgated by President Trump's, the anti-Trump media, leakers in the Justice Department and deep staters in the archives. We know what the law is because we sued about it, and we were told by the judge you can't do anything like this because this is what the law of the circuit is. This is what the law is under our Constitution and under Supreme Court precedent. The president is the decider about what records he chooses to retain, keep, or shred, or tear up, or take with him when he leaves the White House. And when they saw that they had records that maybe were covered and would presumably be the sort of records that the president would allow to be kept as presidential records, they turned them over. And that's being turned into by the president's enemies in the Biden administration as an admission he did something wrong. He didn't do anything wrong. And the other big lie is they're somehow comparing it to what Hillary Clinton did. Hillary Clinton created a non-secure, non-governmental server to conduct government business so she could hide what she was doing from the American people. And she kept government material on that server and then stole it all and deleted half of it, or at least tried to. And we caught her. The president is president of the United States. He can declassify records on his whim. The laws are completely different. So the Justice Department that now wants to harass Trump was protecting Hillary on this very issue. Even though what Hillary did was so wrong under federal law, it's just the number of laws that she potentially violated were so numerous. The fact that she wasn't even seriously considered for prosecution is one of the most corrupt decisions by the Justice Department in modern history. So the left who says don't care about what Hillary did now wants to go after Trump. And I'm saying what Hillary did was quite different than what Trump did, so you can't compare the two. So it's the left that's being hypocritical. And of course, Judicial Watch has this really incredible expertise in the area. So what does the media do? They call all these anti-Trump experts and quote them. And they don't know what the law is. They don't. Or they don't understand how it's applied. I've been driving the left crazy online because I've been telling the truth about this. And on my Twitter bio, I've added the phrase fact checker. Because we need fact checkers for the truth, don't you agree? Not these left-wing juveniles who are acting as arms of the government, who are out there trying to suppress information by coming up with different opinions about what is a fact versus what is a conclusion that people can argue over. So I encourage you to push back against the fact checkers, understand that pretty much everything you hear about President Trump's alleged misconduct, I would say on probably everything, you should be suspect about, given the mendacity of the Justice Department and their ilk. So trust me, trust Judicial Watch. They're lying again about President Trump. and presidential records.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.